We've been going through a little bit in these last few classes, right? This topic of transforming problems into happiness. And so today, the main focus, actually, is using transforming problems, by taking them as a means of cultivating love and compassion, bodhicitta. So actually, I think this is the most important of all, in the series of topics of how to transform problems into happiness. I think this is the most important. It's the most meaningful of all. There are a lot of ways to transform. Right? We've been going through all these different ways of like using problems, contemplate, or like different ways of looking at problems, or different ways of sort of thinking and then feeling differently about them in order to transform our experience of them. And so I think this is maybe a particularly profound one. I want to start with just something simple, though, which is this. So, like when a problem comes to us, right, to ourselves, to me, right? I say me because for each of us it's me, right? Actually, I'm only me from my perspective. Then if I put myself in Jodi's, then she's me, and then I'm him. So it's funny. Like, so we say I. We feel I is over here, but actually the Gabe's I is over there. So I think it's funny. Because actually that's part of what we're trying to train in, right? Is to recognize that. Right? And that's, I guess, what I'm getting at here. So ordinarily when we face like a problem, right, a problem comes to me, right? Which means, then it's an important, actually if somebody else is having a serious problem, that's not that serious, right? But if I even have a small problem, then that's serious because it's to me. Right? That's the ordinary way we perceive things, right? Actually, it's quite true, isn't it? Like, there's if you hear something, like if you like hear a news story, right? That some horrible thing happened somewhere a distance away, right? You might flip the channel, actually, right, or something. Or what? I guess it's click a different button now. Flip the channel. Say, oh, that's the downer. Right? But then, like for yourself, if you just get a tiny splinter, right? Then it's like a big deal. Actually, oh no, what am I going to do? And like it becomes like quite serious, right? And so part of anyway, it's true actually. But so part of the so one thing to recognize, this is what I want to start with. One thing to recognize, right, is that like when a problem comes to me, right, then I think, oh goodness, that's like surprising and upsetting and serious. And one thing that that's true, that one thing that the Buddha pointed out, right, is that first of all, everybody has problems, right? And that like the problems or the suffering of samsara, right? That's that term, right? Samsara, are like like oceans, actually, right? There are oceans of problems, right? And actually, this is not something you don't have to rely on the Buddha. Just check, right? Like in other words, like actually if you go around and just talk to people, it's totally obvious, right? This is not something you have to be like a spiritual person to figure out. Right? Actually if you look around, right, like if everybody has so many problems, right? And then if you don't have one problem, then you have another kind of problem, right? So anyway, the point is like, actually, well, I'll start with this actually before compassion even, right? So this word samsara, right? In a way, samsara means like what? Having a mind and body that are in the nature of problems. Actually, right? Is that I have this kind of mind and body, and I'm always going to have. So there's no escaping that actually, unless you achieve what? Nirvana, right? That's the idea, samsara and nirvana. Right? And so it becomes a little bit funny actually, because if you actually, if you use reason and you look around, right, it's totally obvious that actually this kind of body and mind that we have are totally prone to problems, and there's always problems, right? If you don't have enough, actually, if you go to places where there's not enough resources, right, like not enough water or food, then it's like so much suffering, right? But then if you go to places where there is enough resources, right, then still people are suffering so much, right? And then if you go somewhere where like people are alone, then they have so much problem of loneliness, right? If you go someplace where people have relationships, then they have the problems of relationships, right? So this is obvious, right? And so and remember, like for those of you who were here in the class on samsara and nirvana, right? Like the Buddha taught there are different categories. But I'll just do the simplest one. There are three types of suffering, right? So one type of suffering is like the obvious suffering of suffering, right? Like hunger, thirst, loneliness, desolation. What's the word? Like grief. But sometimes listed like grief and lamentation and sickness, right? Loss, right? Losing loved ones. I mean, these are things that nobody can escape, right? Whereas no matter how powerful you are, you'll still get sick. Right? No matter how strong you are, you'll still die. No matter how, no matter how much you try to like guard against it, you're going to lose people you love, right? That's just as long as you're alive, these things happen, right? And then even, and what the Buddha said actually, which is true actually, if you look around, is most people, like nirvana is uncontaminated happiness, right? He said even just ordinary happiness, like they called it contaminated, it means just like without wisdom. Even ordinary happiness, most people rarely have that, right? There are like these brief moments where somebody's actually feeling happy. Oftentimes, otherwise people are just a little dissatisfied, right? So even that's rare, right? And then even the happiness that people look for is called changeable, right? In other words, it's not a stable happiness, it's the happiness of, that by its very nature is disintegrating moment by moment, right? And it's not at all reliable. And we know that, actually. If you look around, it's totally obvious, right? And so, then I just wanted to point out, so then it's a little weird, right? That when some problem, like, if you're sort of not suffering terribly, right? If you're just sort of an ordinary, you're going through like ordinary level of dissatisfaction, and then your car breaks down, and you think, how could this happen? Which shows there's something weird, actually, right? Like, because of course, like, what do you mean, how could this happen? It happens to everybody, right? Or you get sick and you think, oh no, I can't get sick. I have something to do, right? Actually, I'm just pointing out, like, we all think that, right? It's weird that we think that. Like, actually, it's like saying, it'd be like looking at your face and going, wow, why do I have a nose? Or something. Like, it's like totally obviously part of your nature, right? And yet you're surprised to see it. Like, so, that just shows, actually, right, in the Nagarjuna, in his teachings on emptiness, right, he points this out, he says people want to realize emptiness, right, which is the ultimate nature of reality. And then he says, if they, like, he doesn't use these words, but basically he says, if you haven't even noticed, for example, that you're suffering, and you're still surprised by that, forget about seeing empty. No, it's like, that's totally silly, actually, right? Chandrakirti says there are four, he talks about, like, people who don't even notice suffering, right? They think they think that suffering itself is happiness. They're so confused, right? Like, he says, then forget about seeing the ultimate nature of reality, right? And then he says, also, if they see everything as permanent, which is impermanent, right? So that means, like, people are surprised, like how could that happen? Like somebody died. How can that possibly happen? I can't believe they died, Well, like, in other words, that's like your nose on your face, right? In other words, you have this kind of body, you're going to die. How can you be surprised, right? So he's saying people who don't have people who don't even have the conventional wisdom to know that everything's impermanent, right? How are they possibly going to have some kind of ultimate wisdom? And so my point is that's us, right? In other words, when Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna are talking about such people, and then they also say seeing unclean things as clean. Right? What do they mean by that? Actually, they're talking about your own body. They're like in other words, you take a shower, you look, and you say, oh, I look all right now, or something. Or you look at your partner's body, oh, they look great, right? And Chandrakirti saying, like, what's inside that? And again, this is not to put down. We're not putting anybody down. It's just saying it's the truth, right? And there is actually, if you see the blood, then I get dizzy. So it's a little funny, right? Like, in other words, we don't. And again, it's not like putting down anybody's ordinary experience. It's just saying it's distortions, right? We don't see. Or things are impermanent. We see them as permanent. Things are all the time. Myself and others are having problems, and yet I sort of ignore that. Right? And then when they become really obvious, I become surprised, which is sort of silly. And so, so partly this thing of facing suffering is to be realistic, right? And so to know, actually, right, that there's so much suffering, myself and especially others, right? Actually, that's what they mean by ocean, actually, is if you start to think about how much suffering there is, and like, if you just think of your own suffering, it's hard to think about, right? And then if you think, okay, so I have that, but then like each other person, like, so Fidel has just as much, right? Suffer. Then you start to expand it out. And actually, like, if you get to 10 people, right, then it's almost unimaginable. Then if you get to 100, then 1,000, and then how do you expand that to 1 billion, right? And then billions, But, so then it is like oceans, actually, right? It's actually oceans of problems in the world. And so, the idea then, right, again, all of this is, I remember I've said this before, like, the idea in Buddhism, Buddhist psychology, is that we should be realistic. And that if you're unrealistic, it's going to be a problem for you. Does that make sense, actually, right? Because if you're seeing the world in an unrealistic way, of course there are going to be problems with that, right? So we want to become more and more realistic in our view. So then, so then when problems arise, right? And when we say problems arise, actually, we always mean to me, right? That's our concern. We're not concerned as much if the problems arise to somebody else usually. But so when problems arise to me, right? The question is, so how do you transform those into a path to happiness, right? Into a practice that makes you happy. So one way to start with, right, is what we were already talking about. So let's say, so a problem arises, right? Like whether it's a problem with your body or relationship or vehicle or home, right? Like, so the first step is just, one thing that's useful is just to be realistic, right? To say, of course this kind of thing can happen, right? Like, in other words, that's the nature of having a body, it's the nature of having a home, right? And actually, like, this is part of the nature of samsara, actually, right? Like, in other words, that if you don't have a home, with this kind of mind and body, if I don't have a home, it'll be suffering, and if I have a home, it'll be problems also, right? That's the nature. It's not trying to avoid something, right? It's not saying don't have a home, it's just saying as long as you're in this kind of realm, that's the nature of this kind of realm. And then you think, actually this is useful, right? Then you think, and I'm not alone in that, actually. Every single being around me is exactly the same, right? We're all the same in this way. We all have problems, right? And we all have a mind and a body that are subject to problems. So I'm not at all unique in that way, right? And the problems I'm facing are totally similar to the problems that others are facing, have faced, and will face. Like, actually, so up to this point, right, actually there's no way, or you can't, you can try to deny that, but actually if you look at it honestly, right, it's totally 100% clear, right, there's no doubt about that. And so then, actually before we get to compassion, so one thing actually that, I think I mentioned this briefly, but I just wanted to say it very briefly, is in Buddhist practice, right, this idea of renouncing samsara and seeking nirvana. This is more self for oneself, actually, right? That idea of saying, I'm tired of samsara and I want to practice a spiritual path to achieve nirvana. Actually, that only happens through problems, right? In other words, nobody ever does that because they're, like they think, oh, everything's cool, right? Like, if you think everything's cool, you're not going to seek some kind of liberate, right? Nirvana means liberation, right? So actually, it's like to seek liberation, you have to know that you're suffering. Right? And so actually, in one way, first of all, problems are a teacher in that way, right? In other words, they're what cause us, we talked about this a little before, but they were cause us to enter the spiritual path. But specifically, they were cause us to get tired of samsara and seek nirvana. Right? I'll just share this one. I'll just share this one thought. I remember I had a friend who was doing like prison volunteer work, and he was going in and seeing prisoners, to share Dharma with them, share Buddhism, meditation, and things. And he had been working with them for a while. And then I think he told me that Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I can't remember if he went in person to see them or if he wrote a letter or something. I think he went in person. I'm not sure. But anyway, Lama Zopa said something like, this prison, right, that you're in. Now they were in real prison, right? He said this prison you're in is actually the suffering of being in prison. In this prison is really not much compared to the suffering of the prison of samsara. Right? That's much vaster. And I remember my friend said, I couldn't believe he said that, because But the issue, like, in other words, because, like, he thought, if I had said that, they probably would have wanted to beat me up, they probably would have beaten me. But when Lama Zopa said it, they didn't, because Lama Zopa had realized that. In other words, he was living that recognition, whereas my friend was pointing out, he wasn't yet living that recognition. And the point there is, like, in other words, it's understanding that that the prison is in one's own, ultimately it's in one's own mind, right? In other words, and if one sees that, then one is, and again, the only way to see that is by facing problems. Does that make sense? We never develop that wisdom if we don't look at the problems we're facing. So then if we want, okay, so that's just an introduction. Now is the main topic, right, which is training in compassion. So, like, in terms of in terms of developing compassion and bodhicitta, right? You'll know what bodhicitta is. It's like that, the wish to achieve enlightenment, right, for the sake of all sentient beings. So it's grounded in a compassion for all beings, right, and a sense of infinite love and infinite compassion, right? And the unique quality that's in bodhicitta. So I'm just reminding everybody that, right? So whereas compassion is always a positive state of mind, but then bodhicitta is the ultimate form of compassion, right? So in the sense, because bodhicitta is grounded in love and compassion for all beings, and then includes a sense of taking responsibility for the welfare of others, right? The way a mom takes responsibility for their child, the bodhisattva, right, was somebody who's realized bodhicitta, generates an inner experience of feeling responsible for the well-being of all others, and they strive to become a Buddha, to awaken, right, for the welfare of all beings. So that's just an ultimate expression of compassion. But so to develop, like, compassion or bodhicitta, there's there are two things one has to do. One is one has to remove the main obstacle to that. Right? So the main obstacle to compassion and bodhicitta is self-centeredness. Right? Does that make sense? In other words, if you're self-centered, you're not going to be able to develop a lot of compassion. Right? So one has to, first of all, eliminate or weaken one's self-centeredness. Because actually, if you're being self-centered, right, even if you start to develop a little bit of compassion, self-centeredness co-opts, like, as long as you're still being very self-centered, actually your self-centeredness co-opts the compassion, right? In other words, if you're not self-centered, then the compassion is just pure, genuine wish for others to be free from suffering. Right? But actually, if you're self-centered, right, then what happens? So you start to develop a little bit of compassion, and then you say, aren't I so great? Like, I'm such a nice person. And then you say, I think others should notice I'm such a nice person. I did so much nice for them, right? If you're being self-centered, and then you think, what's wrong with them? They didn't notice how nice I was to them. So then you see how your compassion goes down. So that's what I mean. You can see self-centeredness really is the main obstacle, actually, right? Because with self-centeredness, you're always like there is ultimately it comes back to wanting something, right? That you want, and the point is in Buddhist psychology. Remember this. Self-centeredness is the cause of your own suffering, actually, right? We ordinarily don't think that. We think self-centeredness is the cause of my happiness, right? We always think that, right? And yet it's the cause of your suffering, actually, right? Like, so, because actually, right, as soon as you start wanting, like, so I'm going to be nice to somebody, right? If there's no self-centeredness, right, then it's just, actually it feels quite nice, right? Like, there's a sense of love there, right, which is joyful, and I want them to be happy, right? And it's like a very simple, your mind is actually peaceful in that case, right? Like, your mind has peace and you're just doing something loving for somebody and you hope that they're happy, right? It's very simple. But once self-centeredness comes in, self-cherishing, let's call it, right? Then, like, it becomes so much more complicated, right? Well, I'm doing this, and did they notice I did it? What was their facial expression like? I didn't think they smiled very much when I did it, right? Like, there's all these things that starts going. Then you have to, and you see how immediately your mind becomes, what's the word, agitated, right? Because you're like, well, how were they? Then you're thinking. Then if you're actually a little self-aware, you start thinking, I'm not really supposed to be thinking this way. What's wrong with me? And then it's like you can see how your mind becomes so not. It's like rough, right? It's like not at all a peaceful feeling, right? And it's like that all the time, actually, right? When you have self-centeredness, right? And so again, it's this funny thing that we think, right? When we don't analyze it, ordinary people, if you don't think about it, right? You think. Like, there's a natural habit of feeling, well, I have to look out for myself, right? And I need people to think I'm good, and I need, to be, actually, whatever you think, everybody has different ideas, right? Actually, but whatever your idea is, then you want that to be, right? It's like some idea. I mean, self-centeredness can be, because some people think I want to be the most powerful person, right? Well, then that's their truth. Other people think everybody has to like me, right? Whatever it is, but you think if everybody likes me, then I'll be happy, right? Actually, like you'll never be happy then, right? Like if that's your idea, if that's your self-centered idea, if everybody likes me, then I'll feel peaceful. Actually, you're never going to feel peaceful, right? Because first of all, not everybody's going to like you, and secondly, even if you can get everybody around you to like you briefly, right? Then you're so anxious to how do you keep them all liking you, because then like I'm hungry, but they're not hungry. What am I going to do? I guess I'll stay hungry because I don't want to upset them, because then they won't like me, Or they are hungry and I'm stuffed, but I'll go to the restaurant anyway or something like. And it becomes like this thing because then otherwise they won't like me and they'll be disappointed in me. Or so. I'm just giving you an example, right? Even the simplest one, like self-centeredness of I want to be liked, right? Automatically, your peace is completely gone, right? Like as soon as you get that, and again, like other people don't necessarily know it, as you could be like smiling or something, right? But inside, you're even if, it's actually different, right? There's a genuine smile, right? Like where you're happy to see somebody. And then there's like a smile of like what's the way to say it? I want to look happy. Because if I look happy, then then I seem good or something, right? Like then somebody else thinks I should look serious and then I look good. Whatever, but like these are all self-centered ideas. But you see how there's no peace of mind, right? Because as long as you're self-centered that way, right? It's like immediately, right in that moment, automatically there's no peace, actually. You see? And so. And then also there's not much room for genuine love and compassion. You can have little bits, right? I'm not saying there's zero, right? But it automatically gets like co-opted. Even love, right? So like you could, like if you're having self-centeredness, right? So then like you love somebody, right? Again, maybe there is some genuine love there, right? But well you know this, right? It's totally obvious, right? That when there's self-centeredness, actually it's like not just for yourself, but also for the other person. Actually, your love becomes like annoying, right? Because you have like an agenda, right? And then the person starts to sense that, right? And then it's like actually, then your love for them becomes like partly a nice thing and partly a prison for them, right? Because your love is filled with if there's love mixed with self-centeredness, self-cherishing, right? Like then it's like I love you and I want you to be happy and I want you to be how I want you to be, right? For me. Right? So that's why and then the person's like, well, I really like the part about that you want me to be happy, but the part about that you want me to be how you want me to be for you is not so comfortable for me, And you see what I'm getting? So, it makes yourself unhappy, but also makes other people unhappy. That's my point there. Right? Yeah. So anyway, you get that idea. So then, so one way, right, of using problems to cultivate compassion is once you have a little bit of understanding of that, right, that self-centeredness is the cause of my own, and it causes me a lot of misery and also causes me to cause others a lot of misery, right? Then when problems arise, the phrase that that's usually used in the Buddhist traditions, they say, give the problem to self-cherishing, right? So what is that self-centeredness, right? So what does that mean, actually? So what that means really is this, let's pick. I'll just pick. We can pick any problem, right? But I'm going to pick a simple example of. Let's say my friend is mad at me. Right? So my friend just got mad at me, and ordinarily, right, that would make me very upset, and then I might even get angry back, right? So the idea in this training, right, this is a mind training. This comes from the mind training tradition. So the idea would be this: so my friend is mad at me, right? And so my ordinary approach, right, is to think, if I check in my own heart, right, my friend is mad at me, right? So my ordinary approach is this, I check inside my chest, actually, there's a feeling that arises of like, first of all, it's a feeling of I, right, and then of annoyance, right? And then I'm sort of thinking, what's wrong with them? Right? Actually, that's really the feeling that's there, right? What's wrong with them? Why are they acting this way? They should be nice to me, they're my friend, and I'm nice to them. And actually, there's a phrase in the mind training. It says, "Drive all blames into one." Right? Remember that from the 7 points. A few of you first said the 7 points of mind training. So actually, ordinarily we put all blame on actually many, right? Whoever's annoying, like in other words, we all ordinarily drive all blames into whoever's annoying to me. Um, but here, you drive like all blames into one means your own self-centeredness, right? So in other words, so if my friend is annoyed with me, actually the idea in this training would be, you actually stop and you think, this person is not my enemy. What's my ultimate enemy? An enemy means that which causes me suffering. So okay, my enemy is then my own self-centeredness, actually. Right? That's my real enemy in life, because that's what causes me suffering. Actually, others can't really cause me suffering. What causes me suffering is my own self-centeredness. So I'm going to blame that problem on self-centeredness, which doesn't mean I'm blaming it on me, actually, right? Here you're differentiating myself from my self-centeredness. Does that make sense? So you're not, it's not, when you say put the blame, it's not put the blame on you, right? That's not what this is saying. What it's saying is put the blame on your own self-centeredness. So ordinarily, if you identify with your self-centeredness, right, then you think I'm blaming myself, but that's not correct, actually, right? You're not your self-centeredness, right? From a Buddhist perspective, right, you could say actually your deepest nature is your Buddha nature, right? Which means the emptiness of your own mind. So we're not putting the blame on that for sure, right? So what you're putting the blame on, so you're saying, so the friend gets mad at you, right? So what you would actually be thinking then is, okay, wait a second. If I get mad at them, that just causes them and me more suffering. What's the ultimate cause of this problem? The ultimate cause of this problem is my own self-centeredness, right? Because first of all, there's a good chance from their perspective, right? Because I'm only me from my perspective, but from their perspective, they're me, right? From their perspective, I did something annoying, right? So that might be related to my self-centeredness. Then also secondarily, right? Why am I upset that they're like this? It's because I want everybody to treat me nicely. Okay, then for sure, my upset in my mind, even if I really believe it's all their fault, right? Whatever they're upset about, still the fact that I'm upset about it is my fault. Does that make sense? It's not my fault, but it's my self-centeredness' fault, right? Because actually, why do I think, like everybody has people mad at them sometimes. Why do I think I should be the exception that nobody gets mad at? Right? That's totally a distorted view based on self-centeredness, right? And so actually, then you're taking the problem as a teacher, right? So you're saying, okay, this person's annoyed with me. First of all, if I look at the problem, that the root of the problem is not, because also if I look at the root of the problem as them, right? Actually, I have no control over them, right? They're mad at me, or especially at that time, I have zero control, right? Actually, if I tell them, I want you to do this, they're going to do the opposite, right? So I have like, what's the word? I don't have any control, right? Unless I'm trying to manipulate them, and then they'll figure that out, and then they'll be even more mad at me, right? If I do, what's that called? Reverse psychology, right? The person's going to be even more annoyed because they'll see that I'm trying to manipulate, right? But the point is that, so this person's mad at me, right? So if I blame it on them, and I try to control them, right, what's going to happen? They're going to become more entrenched, right? I'm going to become more and more agitated, and actually I won't be able to sleep that night, right? I'll try to go to bed, and I'll be thinking, what a jerk they are, and what can I do tomorrow, and I'll show them, and and then actually your mind is more and more agitated, right? So the idea here, because the idea is to be happy, actually, right? So you say, wait a second, I'm not going to blame it on them. I want to find the root in myself, right? Which is, and the enemy of compassion is self-centeredness, right? So then you look at yourself. So first of all, can I identify are the things I did that upset them, that made them angry, right? What from there? And actually you're going to say, no, immediately your mind's going to want to say, because you're self-centered, right? Your self-centeredness is going to, well, actually let's differentiate. So let's have it like a dialogue, right? So I say, wait a second, it's self-centeredness' fault. Right? Self-centeredness says, no, it's not, it's their fault. They're annoying. Right? And then I say, hold on, self-centeredness, you're not my friend. You're the cause of my suffering, right? And self-centeredness says, no, I've been causing you happiness your whole life. And I say, well, I haven't been happy my whole life, so you can't, I've had lots of moments of unhappiness, so you haven't done a good job. And self-centeredness says, well, I've done a pretty good job, right? And definitely right now I'm helping you by telling you, be mad at that person, right? And try to get even. And then I say to self-centeredness, right? I'm just giving a metaphor here, right? So I have to say to self-centeredness, actually no, right? As soon as I start to plot, right, how do I make them feel bad or something? First of all, I'm miserable. Secondly, my mind is totally agitated. Thirdly, I'm going to make the problem worse with them. And fourthly, it's bad karma, right? Also, like to try to get even. So self-centeredness, you're wrong. And now I see you, right? I see you self-centeredness in my own heart. you're the cause of this problem. And also, you're making up some whole big thing that they're supposed to be nice to me all the time just because they're my friend. That doesn't happen in this world, right? Even best friends aren't always nice to you, right? So you're totally a liar, right? And self-centered says, no, I'm not a liar. Right? I say, no, I see you now, right? I see you're lying to me because it's true. Actually, if I look around, nobody has everybody treat them nice. Everybody has people, even the people they like are sometimes annoyed with them. So who are, like you're totally making up some phony thing that everybody's supposed to be nice to me. I don't believe you anymore. Right? Now self-centeredness is getting upset. Right? Now self-centeredness is getting mad. No, I don't like this. Right? And so then you say to self-centeredness, I'm giving you this problem actually. First of all, you did some annoying stuff to them, right? I didn't want to do that. That was your idea. Right? That wasn't naturally my nature to be annoying. Self-centeredness, you did that, right? Whereas when they wanted something, you didn't do it. When they wanted you to be more, sensitive, you didn't want to be sensitive because you were being self-centered, right? Which is what you do. Now self-centeredness is kind of hard to get out of that one, right? Then he said also, self-centeredness, you're definitely the one who made up this idea, right? That they shouldn't act that way. Who says they shouldn't act that way? People act that way all the time. Now self-centeredness is saying, well, yeah, but they shouldn't act that way to me. Let them do it to somebody else, right? And then you say to self-centeredness, no, right? That's wrong, actually. In other words, if I believe you, then I'm going to go around expecting everybody to treat me that way. I'm going to keep being miserable because it doesn't ever happen that way. I'm just going to accept their bad treatment. And actually, I'm directing it at you. They're mad at you. They're not mad at me. They're not mad at my basic nature. They're mad at you, self-centeredness. So when they're frowning tomorrow and looking, I'm not going to get even. Instead, I'm going to say, hey, look, they're looking at you. And maybe it'll get you to shut up finally, right? I mean, I'm a little joking here, but actually, it's like an inner dialogue like that, right? In other words, that's how you give the problem to self-cherishing, right? So then, then you go back, right? And the person's so then you see the person next day, right? And they're like that or something. And then, if you're doing this mind training, right? You're saying, see self-cherishing? They're really tired of you. I am too. Right? And then self-cherishing is going, well, I don't know. I think I should get even, right? You say, no, we've already decided. We're not getting even, right? That's towards you. I'm going to be nice to them. But when they're annoying, it's towards you, right? Because if I'm free from you, then I'm actually a very kind person, right? So whenever they're annoyed, that's towards you. But I'm going to try to be kind to them. And even if they don't forgive, if they don't forgive me through my kindness, well, good, because they're mad at you, right? Whereas that means I can still be kind, but I'm going to, no matter how long they're annoyed, I'm going to keep giving that. I'm going to keep saying, hey, take a look.
So who's doing the dialogue?
What's that?
Who's doing the dialogue?
So actually, it's an inner dialogue. So really, the way you could say it is you could call it this, right? On the one hand, there's self-cherishing, right? And on the other hand, you could call it actually two ways to call it. It's up to you how you want to call it. One is the beginnings of wisdom, right? Or another way you could call it is I'm going to call it this: the inner bodhisattva. Right? So the inner bodhisattva, right? The beginnings of bodhisattva, right? Are debating with the old, right? So there's the old self-centeredness, right? And now there's this new, right? The aspiring bodhisattva, let's say, right? And so they're gonna have to fight, actually, right? Because they're opposites, actually, right? And sometimes people think, oh, bodhisattvas don't fight, but actually, what's his name? Shantideva says this actually comes right from Shantideva, right? Because Shantideva says actually bodhisattvas don't fight with anybody else. Actually, in other words, they're not mean to anybody but actually they do have an enemy, and he says that. He says the enemy of the bodhisattva is self-cherishing, self-centeredness, right? And he actually says, Shantideva says, he actually uses a military metaphor sometimes. He says even if you have to, what's the word? He says that's the battle that's worth fighting, actually, or the argument that's worth making. Shantideva says, because he says actually let's say you fight external enemies, right? Always there are going to be more, actually. And the more you fight with them, the more that will come. But Shantideva says, if you fight with this inner enemy, right, self-centeredness, he says, actually, first of all, it's a battle you can win, right, because it's only one, in other words, it's only in your own mind. And he says, and then Shantideva says a very beautiful thing there. He says this, and also, he says, external enemies, they can, let's say you win a battle, right? Well, they can go back and regroup and get more allies and then come back and fight you again. And then he says, if you can destroy this inner enemy of self-centeredness, he says, that enemy has no place else to go, right? They're only in your own mind, so they can't go somewhere else and hide, right? And he says, So if you, in other words, as long as you stay alert and aware, right, you can always find them, and you always know where they are because they're in you. And he says, and when you conquer them, then no more enemies will ever arise, because it's an internal.
But how long you do that? You keep doing, but they are still mad. But how long?
The other person, you mean?
Yeah.
The idea, I guess, in actually, following on this with using Shantideva as the example, what he says is, he makes a smart observation on that point in a way, which is what he says is this: is he says if you really practice in this way, right? He said actually then over time, because you stop being so self-centered, he said actually then it becomes harder and harder to find external enemies, right? Because you start treating others, in other words, the other person's mad at you. He says, but if you respond in this way with compassion, he said then actually he makes a joke almost. He says actually if you're training your mind this way, then you're sort of looking for enemies to work with, right, to train your mind. And he said after a while it'll be really hard to find them because you treat, in other words, it's true actually, right? Because in other words, if the person's mad at you and you come to them and you say, something harsh, and then they get, right? But if you blame it on the self-centeredness and then you act with peace and kindness towards them, right? They may stay mad for a while, of course. But actually the truth is that people don't stay mad that long if you treat them nicely, usually. There are exceptions, of course.
Okay, what happened in that case? You just move on?
Yeah, then you can move on, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah, then you can move on and not, But the idea is, the idea in this mind training though is when you move on, it's not with hatred towards them, right? It's saying, okay, they have then maybe they have a very agitated mind. Actually, it's more compassion for them in a sense, saying, you know what, that's really sad actually. In other words, that even if somebody treats them kindly, their mind is still so filled with anger. And so you move on and say, may they find peace, but I'm not bringing them peace, I'm making them more agitated. So for their sake and my own, I'll move on, yeah.
So I would say this change starts really within yourself.
Yes.
You win that internal battle, and then automatically you're kind to other people because you see them differently.
Yeah.
Self-centered is not in a way.
Right. Yeah.
So you have to be compassionate with yourself first.
Yeah, and actually that you're getting it, right? That in other words, sometimes people misunderstand this, right? Actually, that's actually a very important point what you said, because if somebody doesn't differentiate from that's why I was doing it as an inner dialogue actually, is if you don't differentiate from your inner self-cherishing, self-centeredness, right? Then it feels like masochistic or something, right? But actually, if you understand what we're talking about, actually this is compassion for yourself, right? This is saying I'm identifying the inner cause of my suffering, and I'm healing myself by by stopping it. In other words, by saying to that part, if I differentiate it as a part of me, right, is saying I'm not going to follow you anymore because you're the cause of suffering, and I have compassion for myself, so I'm not going to listen to you if you're teaching me something that's wrong, And so in a sense that is, it really, exactly, you got it right, is that this practice actually is a form of compassion for yourself, actually, right? It's immediately giving you peace, mostly. But then, of course, also your behavior becomes more gentle and kind because, actually, if you're compassionate, that's what, sometimes we say it's a common saying, right? You have to be compassionate to yourself to be compassionate to others. But actually, this is a very, on a superficial level, that could be like, I don't know, like, some more behavioral kind of thing, which is fine, but that only really lasts a very short time, right? Or it's like if I say, okay, I'm going to buy myself something, right, to be nice to myself, and then maybe I'm in a good mood, so I'm a little nicer to other people. But then very quickly, right, you buy an album, right, then 2 weeks later you're tired of it, and then doesn't have much meaning, right? But if you do this kind of compassion for yourself, right, identifying the inner cause of the suffering, and then working with it, working through it, and decreasing it, right, then automatically you become so much more peaceful and gentle with other people. So that makes sense, right?
So like she's saying you have to sweep, like you're sweeping the crowd, like you're sweeping, like doing the sweeping. You're just sweeping away
the what? The inner
dust.
Dust,
like,
yeah.
Like when you move the dust, you clear the space.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, other comments or and so you get the idea. So the idea. This is the first. So I want to go through a couple of different parts, right? And actually, because there's another part also that there's another step I want to get to. 2 more steps I want to get to, but I just want to emphasize this one first because I think it's the most important one. It's the hardest one in a way, and I think it's just hardest because there was here and now we're sort of I don't know, we can discuss it, right? But do you have a sense? I just want to like think about it, because actually Shantideva in that Bodhisattva's Way of Life, he also points out that at the beginning, for beginners, this is not so easy. Actually, right? And he says like sometimes he uses the metaphor of battle. He says you're battling with your self-centeredness, right? Self-cherishing, and he says like at the beginning there will be some self-centeredness is actually is more, what's the word? You're more habituated to that, right? So at the beginning, actually, the self-centeredness is actually a little stronger, and you only get it only improves through effort, right? And so he points out at the beginning it's going to take a lot of effort, and I just want to say that's true actually, right? Like because if we've been habituated to self-centeredness for a long time, right? Then like in other words, it's not so easy at the beginning, right? At the beginning, there's going to be a strong habit, especially in other words, if you're distant from it. If you think of something that happened 5 years ago, you could do this, right? But when it really is happening in the moment, it's very hard because the self-centeredness really, what's the word? It tries to convince you, right? It's a very strong inner voice or inner way of thinking. And there are a few things that are hard. One is to differentiate, to say that's just self. You have to recognize it, right? To say, oh, that's self-centeredness. That's not me, right? And then you have to start to analyze, use it. And really what we're talking about here is, actually, in New York recently, right, the Dalai Lama said something like that. I don't know if you heard it, you guys were there. He said, sometimes I want to talk to my delusions, right? He said that. He said, sometimes my anger or my craving or desire, he said, sometimes I want to talk to it using reason, right? And that's what we're talking about here, right? There is that's a traditional practice, right? Is that you differentiate from it, and so what you're doing really is this. So the first step is you have to recognize I'm not my craving, right? Because ordinarily when we have a craving, right, we just feel I want this, right? And it's stepping away and saying, if it's craving, then it's self-centeredness that wants this. That's different from like, I want to be clear again. That's different from saying, oh, I'm hungry and I want to eat today, right? That's not craving. Craving is like that feeling, right, of like, I need this, right? I'll only be happy when I have this. And whatever it is, I have to have it, right? That's self-centeredness, right? And so then you have to step away from it. You have to say, oh, that's not me. That's self-centeredness talking again, right? And how can I tell? Because my mind is agitated, right? There's as soon as you feel craving, right? Wow, my mind is agitated. What's going on? Oh, that must be the inner enemy, right? Self-centeredness. So then you step away. What are you doing, self-centeredness, right? Well, I want this, then I'll be happy. But having stuff doesn't make you happy. Everybody knows that. Just getting stuff doesn't make you happy. Yes, it will, right? Self-centeredness, yes, it will. It'll make me happy. Shut up. Like recognize, like in other words, let's get back together here on this, right? Self-centeredness doesn't want you to see it, right? In other words, that's its habit, right? And you have to step out and say, no, actually, that's not the cause of happiness, right? The cause of happiness is having a peaceful mind. You're already agitating the mind is already agitated when you start doing that, right? And actually, like, we know this, right? Then if I follow that, I'm going to be agitated, then I'm going to get something, and then I'm going to feel, whatever, like excited, and then it's going to go back down. It doesn't work, right? Like, I'll get things or I won't get them, but I'm not going to get them for that reason. You see what I mean? Like, because if I do it for that reason, I'm never going to be happy. This is not saying do or don't buy things, right? It's saying if I follow you and buy things or don't buy things for that reason, if I don't get it, I'm going to feel like the sense of, oh, I didn't get it, like a little 2-year-old, right? And if I do get it, I'm going to be like a 2-year-old with a toy, right? Oh yeah, I got the toy, and then then it breaks or they throw it on the side, because self-centeredness is like a 2-year-old actually, right? And saying, so no, I'm not going to listen to that, right? That's not the path to happiness. You see what I'm getting at? So you have to keep differentiating from self-centeredness, and then you give the problems to self-centered, right? So if you do buy the thing and then it breaks and then you're upset, right? And you say that was your fault. We bought it for the wrong reason. We bought the wrong thing for the wrong reason because I followed you again. Why do I keep doing that? Now I'm not going to do it anymore, right? You see what I'm getting at? So every problem you can give back to self-centeredness. Then, how are we doing that? Okay, good. Then there comes, so you get that idea. And then once you've worked on the that has to kind of come first, really, right? In other words, because as long as you're following self-centeredness, there's no space, to use your metaphor, right? This is all filled with dirt, right? There's no room. But once you've kind of moved self-centeredness out of the way, then you have some space, actually, psychologically, right? And then there comes another benefit. So now it's like you're really looking forward to problems, right? So, first of all, I have something to give to self-centeredness. This is really going to help me with that. Then there's another benefit to the problems. I can't wait to have more problems, right? You may be starting to think that way. So another benefit of problems actually is if my goal, right, if the way to be happy is love and compassion, right? Well, compassion in particular means, actually compassion grows from empathy, right? In other words, you don't have compassion for others when you don't understand their suffering, right? Because compassion, to differentiate, love means wanting others to be happy, right? Feeling close to others, feeling affectionate to them and wanting them to be happy. And then compassion is even stronger in wanting them to be free from their suffering, right? And so actually you can't have compassion if you don't have empathy that understands others' suffering, right? How can you wish others to be free from their suffering if you don't even want to look at it? And most of us were like that, right? Usually we're like this, like, like we're trying to distract, actually we're like this now. I don't want to see others suffering, so, so that's how we distract ourselves, right? So we don't have to look away anymore, you can just look down. Everybody's not, if you look at people, everybody's looking down now. But anyway, so the idea here is that you use your problems as a basis for empathy and compassion, right? And so you think, actually, okay, like, so I'm just going back to the earlier example, right? So, so somebody's mad at me, right? My friend is mad at me. And so then if you're contemplating this, you would say, wow, like, in other words, if my goal is to cultivate compassion, how many people are there whose partners or friends or whatever, whatever it is, are mad at them, right? And what is the suffering that people go through from that? And then if you start contemplating like that, right? And you think, okay, you can really empathize. In other words, because actually, it's not always easy to empathize with somebody else, right? But if you've had a similar, actually, even scientific researchers on empathy have shown this is true, that the more similar your experiences to somebody else's, the easier. You can empathize with very different experiences, but it's much easier if you have a similar experience, right? It can become more heartfelt. You can do it, in other words, the other, it takes more, what's the word? It takes more effort and imagination to put yourself in the other person's shoes, right? But if you've gone through something very similar, then it's quite easy, actually, to empathize. And so then you would think, so this problem is helping me empathize, actually, right? And then you could think, how many people do I know who have had similar problems? And how well did I empathize with them, right? And then you think, wow, I can remember this person who went through this and this. And if you start thinking, actually, it won't be hard, right? Because actually everybody around you is having similar problems, right? So you would start to use your problem and say, wow, now I get what this person. Then you might think, how many people in the world are going through that, actually, right? And then it becomes quite easy to say, wow, there are so many, right? And many of them are going through it worse than me, right? Like, in other words, I'm just having the problem with this person. Like, actually, it's quite easy, right? I'm just having this person that the person is annoyed at me at work or something, or my partner's annoyed, whatever it is, right? But then there are other people who are being abused, right? And beaten, there's physical violence, and all that, and then, there are people who are going through much worse, and not to say, to minimize my problem, but to say, now I can understand what they're going through, right? Like, in other words, how much worse that would be, actually, if you felt, if you're in a situation where you don't have any control, right? Or if you're in a situation where the person has a weapon or something, or if you're in the situation where, it's abuse, or something, and you say, wow, and it can be like this, and it can be like that, right? And you start to develop a stronger and stronger sense of empathy and compassion. Right? And the same thing, right? Lama Zopa Rinpoche often gives the example of illness, right? That there's if you start to feel sick, right? Nobody likes that, right? But then, first of all, everybody on the planet actually gets sick, and if they're not, and there isn't, and if they haven't been sick, and actually, you would actually it's funny in a way, you would hope that people get sick, because the only way they're not going to get sick is if they drop dead, right? Otherwise people get sick. That's the nature of being alive, right? And so everybody does, right? So so if you say, oh, may this person never get sick, actually, it'll be are you hoping they'll die? Because otherwise they're going to.
But somebody gets more sick, somebody get rare,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the levels of sickness.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess,
Somebody
the basis.
may not, right?
What's that?
Somebody may not get sick.
Yeah.
Huh?
Well, actually, eventually, though, right? In other words, if you think of, actually, if you check anybody who's 90 years old, for sure they've been sick.
Forget about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so if we live long enough, we'll get sick, I suppose, yeah. Yeah, I remember my grandfather lived quite old. I remember talking, he was very healthy most of his life, but of course, he had so many problems, in other words, to make it from in his 50s up to 90, it was so many, then it got so many more, the number of problems increased.
Now up to 60.
Yeah.
Less than 60 is fine.
But, and so I guess, just what I'm pointing out is that, so even if you get a small sickness, actually, right, if you get a big sickness or a small sickness, the idea is, actually though, if you see this is true, actually, right, if you see people who are going on, for example, if you hear, actually, you hear this sometimes. The interviews of people who are like on a walk, right, for cancer, or multiple sclerosis, or any of the various diseases, right. And then actually you can hear it in the people's voice, right. In other words, like most of the people who are there is because either they had it, or their parents had it, or their child had it, right. And then there's so much empathy there, right, for the other people, right. Whereas actually, why is it that most of the people there have had a personal experience? It's because of this, right. It's because they have more empathy then, and then they have more compassion, and then and then it becomes natural, right? In other words, they're not saying, "Oh, somebody's making me go for a walk. I don't want to go." It's this feeling of they have so much compassion and empathy that they want to do something, right? And it's a spontaneous. It makes them feel better actually to take an action, right? And to be with other people who are having a similar experience, right? People with depression, same thing, right? Like in other words, then there's a walk for that. But the idea is that, right? Is that so you use and the idea here, right, if we're trying to cultivate universal compassion, is we don't want to have every problem. That's not the goal. So it's to use whatever problems we have as a basis for empathy. Does that make sense? And a basis for understanding. And then based on that empathy, then to develop compassion, right? So feeling, I can feel others suffering, actually, and I wish they could be free from it, and I want to help them be free from it, right? That's compassion. So what we always do a little exercise, right? An interactive exercise. So I want to suggest this, we do it on this one. And it's this. So what I want to ask people to do for just like 10, 15 minutes, something like that, is get together in small groups of maybe like three, about 3 people. But here's what I want to ask you to think about, is what I want to have people do is this, is a few steps. One is each person think of one significant experience of suffering you yourself have had, right? And whether that's, a problem with your relationships, or a problem with health, or a problem with, whether it's, with your parents, or with your child, or with your spouse, or it could be a problem with, with your health, or it could be a problem with your work, or, safety, or to play, whatever it would be, but to share that story as a basis for empathy. Does that make sense? So as you tell the story, share it honestly, but be thinking in terms of empathy. And as you listen to the other person's story, empathize with them, and then also think, contemplate. The idea is you're contemplating, wow, this person went through that, and I can see them. Look in their face as they're telling the story, and think, and so many people have gone through this, like they have. So try to expand the compassion out just a little bit, right? So it's not taking your attention away from them, but it's really paying attention. They've experienced this, and so have others. And try to develop a sense of empathy and compassion. And then also as you're sharing the story, share it honestly, but also recognize, well, I'm not unique in this, right? Like the person who's on like it helps, right? Actually, it's useful to recognize that. And then each person just share a short, like a 5-minute version of an example. So you get it, an example of a problem or a suffering you went through, using that as a basis for developing empathy and compassion. Any questions about the exercise, or is that clear? Okay, so go ahead. Well, I'll have like 15 minutes, so get up in groups of 3, and just each person take about 5 minutes to share. So, just first, any comments or questions from that exercise? Just anything anybody wants to share, or should we just?
We are a good group. We got things in common,
That's good.
I'm glad I'm here.
That's great.
I found my place because I'm an open, I don't believe all the religious those things, That's all. I think everything scientifically, It's proven, cannot prove, So what you said, I'm you.
That's
Yes, I'm telling people like that. People nobody.
good.
But my problem is, I getting angry when somebody make a mistake. The people I helped. Then I said, I have all the right. I helped you so much. Listen to me. Then they'll get angry at me.
Yes, that's that.
Yeah. No, I helped so many people in my family. Everybody said, I'm angry, mad at me because I always telling something. After 1 or 2 drinks, then I tell then they get more angry.
Oh, that's good.
We're laughing because we all kind of relate.
I know. So one of the person I helped so much, she didn't invite me for the Christmas party. Because I drink, maybe it might be some problem. So from then on, I got fighting so much. I told her to give me email one sorry. She never said sorry. I gave her life. I gave her H1B visa this time. See the word. Yes, I
This
found
is
my
sort of-
place now. God saved me.
This reminds me of one of the verses we'll cut, next class we'll do a verse on that exact thing.
Okay.
When you've been kind to others and then they treat you bad. There's a whole teaching on that one specifically. So we'll do that next time actually. So come back.
No, because I'm always looking for something. I'll go to all the churches, which one fits me. So this one, I just always Google them, Oh my God, look at that. Oh. Because, I know Buddha, the story from there. So I found the place nearby. Actually, my house is in Maryland. And my second son got driving license. I said, okay, goodbye. I'll come here to, for weekdays, I have a room, work here, I got small IT company. I see you later.
Well, I said we would meditate again, so I wanted to be sure we do that. Okay, so we'll do, unless other comment, let's do a little meditation. But I want to actually do, so some of you are familiar and some maybe not, with taking and giving meditation, right? In Spanish, it's called Tonglen. You guys were talking about that? Or?
We were just talking about
Okay.
it.
But there's a specific practice, this is why I wanted to, we haven't done it in this way before, so I want to teach it specifically. It's specifically using, so I want to use the stories you guys just, I want you to use the stories you just told to each other, right? You pick one or two of the examples, and then we're going to do taking and giving meditation based on that kind of suffering. Does that make sense? So each of you can use a different thing depending on what either the story you yourself told, or the story somebody else in your group told. Use that as the basis for this meditation. Does that make sense? So, the first step in the meditation, it's a complex. I mean, it's not that complicated, but it has a number of important symbolic elements. Let's say, like important parts, right? One is you start off actually by visualizing. Remember earlier we talked about self-centeredness, right? Essentially, when you have, I want to point out the psychological part of this for a moment. Like, when you have that feeling of self-centeredness, when it's really strong, you feel it in your chest, actually, right? Whereas when somebody really insults you, right? There's a feeling like, oh, that rises up. So here, you visualize, there are different ways to do it, but I want to do a dark seed, or a dark seed, let's call it, in the center of your chest, right, inside, that symbolizes, it's a symbol, right? It's a visualized symbol of your self-centeredness. Does that make sense? So like, in other words, because we're trying to differentiate that from us, right? It's almost like, if a person's healthy and then they have an infection, right, then the infection's in them, so it's almost like that, right? Your self-centeredness is like this little seed that's not you, but it's there inside you now, right? And we're going to use, it's a visualization we're going to do that symbolizes giving, taking the problem and blaming it on the self-cherishing. Does that make sense? And then we're going to do, that's taking, actually. You take away, through empathy, you take away the other's, empathy and compassion, actually. You take away the other's suffering, you give it to your self-cherishing to destroy it, and then you practice love and generosity. Okay? And I want to be clear, too, that this is a meditation for cultivating those states of mind, right? Whereas it's not, so it's a meditation designed to cultivate feelings of love, compassion, bravery, and overcoming self-cherishing. That's the purpose of this meditation. So I'll describe just how to do it. So I'm going to go through step by step now, slowly, right? So exactly, good question. That's what we're going to do. So visualize that dark seed, and again, just thinking that's a symbol of my habit of self-centeredness, right? Now, you're going to pick one kind of suffering, right, that you just, either your own or somebody else's that they shared a story about, right? And let's start with just that, let's start by just thinking of, one or two people who have that kind of suffering in their real life, okay? So if it was somebody else in your group, you can include them, and generate a sense of empathy, right? So really try to think for a few moments about that suffering really at the time was very hard for that person. Or does it really cause them a lot of pain? And, think of their face. comforts yourself in the passing of your own experience, right? Until you generate a sense, a feeling of empathically understanding that suffering, really, that it's, and if you really put yourself into that, right, then it starts to give rise to compassion. The empathy gives rise to a feeling of, well, I don't want them to have that suffering. Now, as you continue to cultivate that feeling of compassion for the other suffering, you're going to visualize that specific suffering like rising up, like your compassion kind of pulls it away from them, like a dark mist or a dark cloud, like relieving them of that suffering. So you imagine that that suffering is kind of pulled away from them, which is what compassion wants to do. And imagine that dark cloud kind of up above. And now your compassion pulls it towards you, away from them, right? Because you want to pull it away from them. And imagine that now you're pulling that dark cloud of that specific suffering towards you, and you want to give it to that inner enemy, the self-centeredness, in order to destroy it. So you imagine taking that dark cloud in, and it kind of draws, almost like a vacuum, right? It sort of draws towards the self-centeredness in your heart until it sort of implodes there. Completely, so it sort of implodes inward onto that dark seed, completely destroying it. Actually, ultimately, that dark seed was just a delusion, actually. And so the awareness of that suffering destroys that delusion. When a delusion is destroyed, there's no place for it to go, it just disappears. Because it was never ultimately real to begin with. So both the suffering, the dark cloud of suffering, and also the dark seed of self-centeredness are now destroyed. And what's left then in your heart is just light. The light of affection, the light of loving kindness, the light of peacefulness, and just simple kindness. So now imagine that light radiating outward, specifically to that person or those people who you thought of earlier. And this is the light of love. Right? So imagine that light touches that person or those people and gives them what they need. Right? That's the wish for love. Gives them what would make them happy, especially deeply happy. So it gives them peace of mind. It gives them a sense of connectedness, of warmth, of acceptance. It gives them safety and peace in their life. It gives them a sense of well-being, of health, of contentment. As you feel that kind of love radiating like light from your heart, you can just imagine or visualize giving them whatever you like. Allowing yourself to be creative. Even up to, giving them enlightenment itself. So let's do another round. So that's like one round of first taking, then giving. So now we'll do another round of taking, then giving. But this one I want to suggest that to use specifically a suffering of your own. Right? We're going to do it just slightly different way, right? So think of a specific one kind of suffering that you yourself have experienced this round, right? And remember that suffering. Again, there's the seed of self-centeredness in your heart, which was the cause of that suffering, ultimately. Even if you can't see that it was the cause of the externals, for sure it was the cause of your suffering, which was in your mind. And then think about now, right, all the countless others, so many others who have gone through the exact sort of suffering that you went through. And you can sort of take a few minutes to actually empathize and like visualize, imagine the details, right? Maybe there were variations. The other people's experiences were, had different external slight details. But their inner experience, right, was so similar, right? Their inner experience of so much like misery, worry, or problems was so similar to yours, right? And it wasn't just one person, but there are millions, right? Depending on suffering, for sure millions, maybe billions of people have gone through similar suffering. You can visualize them all around you. You can like imagine their faces showing the emotion of going through that experience. You can imagine them saying things, not just what they say, their tone of voice, everything in their posture, in their demeanor reveals how they're going through, how they also share that kind of suffering. That we're all the same in that. Right? Their experience is so similar to your own. And by seeing their faces, thinking of them, knowing what they're going through, like you can totally get how they feel because it's so similar to how you have felt. You generate then from that empathy a wish, right, of compassion. May they be free from that suffering. May they be free from it now. May they be free from it always. That is like unbearable, actually, right? That so many people should have to meaninglessly go through that kind of suffering, right? Without any purpose, right? just experiencing that for no reason, it's unbearable. May they be free from it. May I myself be able to free them from it. Compassion is this like wish, right? I so want them to be free from it. May they be free from it. May I be able to free them, help them, bring them the peace of not having that suffering. And through that wish, like slowly, the suffering starts to rise up from all of them, like that dark cloud. And slowly, as you see that dark cloud of suffering like lifting off of their shoulders, right, you can see with each person actually that their facial expression changes, right, like relief. And it goes from an expression, their tone of voice, their body posture, their face. It goes from like a look of suffering or anguish or fear or misery. And as the dark cloud lifts off of them, they're like, relieved. And you imagine that compassion pulls all the suffering away from them, giving all of them that sense of peace, that sense of relief. And again, with the kind of brave compassion you feel, it's not enough that they be relieved now. I want them never to experience that again. It's totally unbearable if they should have to just meaninglessly go through that. So I want to permanently take it away from all of us, from all of them, including myself. So I'll give it to self-cherishing. The illusion, the delusion, the hallucination in my own heart. And so you draw it towards yourself, that dark cloud. You draw it towards the self-centeredness in your heart. It all kind of implodes. Completely obliterating the suffering, and also at the same time obliterating, destroying the self-cherishing itself that was in your heart, which itself was like a delusion, like a hallucination. And so the seed of self-cherishing has disappeared like the way a dream disappears when you wake up. And what's left there in your heart then is just open space of loving kindness, radiant like the sun in your heart. And that radiant sunlight of loving kindness fills your whole body first. Let's imagine that, right? So like your entire body gets filled with this radiance of energy and the nature of love, the nature of kindness. A kind of peaceful, altruistic vibration fills your body from the bottoms of your feet all the way to the crown of your head. And then you yourself, right, who are completely now filled with that loving energy from all parts of your body, like from all your pores, it radiates outward. And so all those beings around you from whom you took away their suffering, right, just taking away their suffering is not enough. You want them to be happy. So from all your pores, that light of loving happiness, of joy radiates out. Giving them everything they need for happiness. So it gives them all the external resources they need, right? And it also gives them the inner things they need. As you radiate that loving light from all your pores, again, this time really try to imagine, right? Imagine looks of incredible, like, peace, of tranquility, of joy, even of, like, bliss on their faces, right? Now their demeanor, their facial expression, their tone of voice, right, reflects a sense of inner contentment, of happiness, of joyfulness, until they're all like totally blissed out. Even giving them wisdom, right? You can imagine that just as you are, like, from all your pores radiating joyful love, right? That their eyes, like, are all showing the aspect of joyful love. It's like that same light is filling all of them. They feel content and joyful, right? You can imagine, like, so many, right? All those beings who were suffering like you were before. Right? And you can see in their eyes this sense of joy and also of, like, that light that comes, right? When someone's blissfully happy and totally overwhelmed with gratitude and love. The final step to this meditation, let's imagine ourselves still radiating that love, right? But imagine that also those around us are radiating love. You can imagine like the whole planet, right, enveloped in that kind of light. And radiating that light out into the universe. Until like the entire universe is bathed in loving, joyful, like overwhelmingly peaceful light. That's in the nature of gratitude, of joyful loving kindness. And finally, we'll just do the, we'll conclude this meditation with a dedication. So like by any, that we dedicate any positivity we created today, any good virtue or any merit, any positive karma. So that we ourselves and all others may find happiness, right, by overcoming the inner enemy of self-centeredness, by cultivating love, inner peace, compassion, and joy. May everyone everywhere, right, may I myself and everyone everywhere, like, have success in that way, right, in living meaningful lives, filled with love, compassion, and bodhicitta. And that supreme jewel of bodhicitta, wherever it has not arisen, may it arise. Where it has arisen, may it increase more and more. May it never decrease, but only increase. So that I and all others are then totally filled more and more, day and night, with love, compassion, altruism, and the aspiration to be a benefit to others, the aspiration to enlightenment for the welfare of all beings. And we can come back to it. Just to conclude for a couple minutes in a more interactive. If there are questions, I just want to give a chance in case. Are there questions about that taking and giving meditation?
But I could think of myself, but I cannot think other people have. If I think how to affect them, they don't know,
You mean, the idea here, that's a good question. The idea in this meditation, just to be clear, there was, I'm going to say this right. The idea of this meditation is not that we have some magical power and we can actually suck, we're some spiritual vacuum that can take
Right.
other people. It's not that. The idea of this meditation is that it's to cultivate a state in our own mind. In other words, and the idea is really this, that if one does this meditation, right, regularly, that it has a few effects, actually, and it's true, actually. One is, it increases our ability to have compassion, to have empathy, to have love, that it increases our ability also to bravely face difficult things, because you're looking, by breathing in and so on, it sort of creates an attitude also of brave compassion in a way. And so it's not that one believes that one is actually taking away other suffering, but the idea is that it creates, those habits in our own mind, so that then when we do come across people, that instead of doing this, we'll look, and instead of sort of closing in on ourselves and not feeling connected, we'll open up.
to taking positive energy.
Yeah, so it's really that. It's that we're. It's not that we believe. There's no idea in Buddhism that by doing that we're sort of magically
That's why
healing the sick or
It's hard to believe that one.
Yeah, no, that's not the idea in Buddhism. The idea is that it's really a way of cultivating our mind, actually, and that it's supposed to be just the idea is really that it's a very effective tool for training our mind in those qualities. But it's not a mystical magic or something. That's not that. That's not the idea.
I'd like to add, since you mentioned, I don't know your name, my friend up front, but since you mentioned you like to follow the science
Yeah.
behind things, I studied psychology and neuroscience at Mason.
Okay.
Did a lot of presentations on the neurological benefits of meditation.
Okay.
It actually changes the brain structure in certain areas. So it's definitely science
Yeah.
based.
My name is Matt.
Matt and James.
Your name?
James.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'll say one other thing. Like, I'll just add one quick comment on that, which is that was very interesting. Like, particularly, there are a number of scientists who studied. I was thinking of Richard Davidson's research at the University of Wisconsin. But really, Buddhist psychology has always said that compassion is the main cause of happiness. Actually, whereas the ancient teachings of Buddhist psychology said that the most powerful cause of happiness is compassion. And then I remember when they started. I remember this. Now it's been repeated in many places, but that when they would have monks go in and meditate, Buddhist monks would go in and meditate. They said, "Okay, now meditate on this." When they would do the meditation specifically, they would do various meditations. But when they would do the meditation on compassion, that the parts of the brain that have been shown to be associated with happiness would suddenly have more neural activity, and which I remember at the beginning, the scientists were surprised. Brain readers, the people who were doing the functional MRI studies, were surprised because they thought, well, they were saying, well, that wasn't what we expected. We expected other parts, and then. Of course, like the Dalai Lama was like, that's what we've said for 2,500 years. Of course that's the part of the brain that would like, which I was. And now they've repeated that, of course, many times. And now the research on gratitude and compassion, are very shown to be linked to happiness, which again is interesting, right? Because we always, it's not us. Self-centeredness thinks, right? No, that's not the cause of happiness. The cause of happiness is me getting more, right? But if we differentiate, right, that's self-centeredness' position, whereas, scientific research and also, wisdom suggests that is the cause of happiness, or that it's positive states of mind that are right. So, if you look at what are the cause of happiness, it's feeling things like love, compassion, joy, gratitude, contentment. So it's mental states that cause happiness, obviously. So, but now there's more and more scientific.